All right, good morning. As Helen said, my name is Jonathan Frazier, and I work for the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement as a Renewable Energy Program Specialist. I serve as the co-chair for the CMTS Offshore Energy Facilitation Task Team. For those of you who are not familiar with the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement, commonly known as BSEE, we're a separate and independent safety and environmental oversight entity established to drive safety and environmental protection performance during energy exploration on the Outer Continental Shelf. While the Renewable Energy Program on the Outer Continental Shelf is led by the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Management, commonly known as BOEM, my bureau conducts, consults, and advises in support of BOEM on all matters concerning safety, environmental compliance, oversight, and enforcement for the Renewable Energy Program. Offshore wind energy developers have contacted BSEE to request federal assistance and guidance to ensure that mitigating munitions and explosives of concern can be accomplished in a safe, environmentally responsible, and timely manner while meeting all the federal agencies' needs. This listening session is the start of addressing this request. Again, while no federal representatives will be providing direct responses during today's listening session, we feel the information that you all provide will serve as the foundation of our understanding of this topic and help in driving the discussion among federal partners of the CMTS task force. Please feel free to share your challenges and concerns, lessons learned from previous experience, and what we can do to help and close the gaps with existing best practices and protocols. The Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement and the United States Coast Guard have had a strong working relationship when it comes to oversight of safety and environmental compliance for the Outer Continental Shelf activities. As continued commitment to this working relationship, Coast Guard Commander Stephen West serves as my co-chair for this task team. Thank you again for attending, and I'd like to now turn it over to Commander West for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Jonathan. Appreciate that. Again, my name is Stephen West. I've been with the Coast Guard for just under 20 years now. Exciting time for us right now to be moving into renewable energy offshore. As Jonathan spoke, BSEE and the Coast Guard has worked very closely together for offshore energy with oil and natural gas platforms. We have a long history in that arena, specifically out on the Outer Continental Shelf outside 12 nautical miles. Now we're entering into a new phase with renewables, and we're working together to figure out the regulatory framework as well as the oversight with inspections with how those new energy platforms are going to work. One of the items that came up was, as developers are working on installation of these new platforms, they may run into unexploded ordnance. And the question was, how are developers expected to work through that? And naturally, they look to the federal government for guidance on that. Inside 12 nautical miles, inside our ports and our major waterways, I think we have a pretty good handle on how those operations would take place, and our reliance on other federal and DoD elements to help us mitigate those threats. When we start moving outside 12 nautical miles and into deeper water, there's other elements that are involved and other questions that come up that we need to work through. First step, obviously, is to hear from industry and hear specifically what your concerns are and what tools are at your disposal so that we can work together to mitigate these threats. So look forward to hearing all your comments. As Jonathan noted, we won't be responding directly to each of your questions today, but we will be gathering all those together to work on guidance for you in the near future. All right, thank you very much for your time. I'll pass it back to Helen.
Thank you so much, Commander, and thank you, Jonathan. So just to reiterate, our procedures today is that we have two companies. They are Ørsted and James Fisher Renewables, who have requested to formally present through our email request. After that, we will call on folks who raise your hand. So if you are in the computer system, in the application, we ask that you raise your hand, and we will call on you in the order in which you've raised your hand. We ask that everybody who presents identify themselves and the organization they are representing. For those on the phone, we will take time also to call on folks to introduce themselves. You will have to jump in orally to request to be on. We'll do our best to sort through multiple requests at the same time. Once again, please ask that you mute your phones and unless you're presenting. If you are not presenting, please turn off your video camera. That helps preserve some bandwidth for us. I want to note that, again, as it says on the slide, if you can see it, if you have comments, please, you're free to submit written comments to offshoreenergy@cmts.gov until December 16th. The listening session today is being recorded. If you do not want to be recorded, we ask that you get off the system right now. Also, if all comments have been received before the end of our session, which is 1100 to 1230, we may end the session early. With that, I'm going to go to our first presenter, which is Mr. Ed LeBlanc with Ørsted. Sir, you wanted to share your screen?
Yes, thank you, Helen. I'm going to share my screen now, which could be an adventure. Let's see if we can do this. Okay, do you?
Not yet.
Okay. No. Let me stop and try another one. Try that. Okay. Now do you see it?
I think it's coming up.
Okay.
There we go. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, and so you just see a single slide on the screen, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. So good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, rather. Thank you, Helen, for hosting this and for providing Ørsted an opportunity to provide comments. I'm Ed LeBlanc. I'm the head of Marine Affairs for Ørsted. Let me see. Is the slideshow? Did it go to the second slide?
Sir, you haven't started the slideshow. We're seeing an individual slide with slides on the left. You may wish to go to slideshow at the top and then start from the beginning.
Let me see the slideshow.
Yep, you had it. Click on the slideshow above, right there, and to the left from beginning. Yes, sir. Thank you.
How's that?
Perfect.
Okay, there we go. And then this is where we are today. Thank you very much. And so the U.S. Committee on Marine Transportation System asked 3 questions, and the presentation today, I hope, addresses those 3 questions, and we will be providing written comments as well. So to begin with, this issue of what we are calling residual UXO, which is a UXO that where we have surveyed and did not find any, and I use UXO and MEC interchangeably, excuse me, but we have unexploded ordnance or munitions of explosives of concern. And I think MEC is the preferred term these days, and I'll try to use that term going forward. In any event, in areas where we've surveyed and we found no munitions of any sort, and then we are actively working that area to construct our wind farm, and we come across MEC, the question to be asked is, what is the federal guidance to us going forward? This is not a new issue. It was identified in a BOEM study back in 2017, and in that study, it acknowledged that guidance was necessary, and here we are today, looking for that guidance. So the Department of Defense, they certainly have identified many munitions dump sites off the Atlantic coast, but perhaps not all. Here's an example of an area that has not been identified as a munitions dump site by the Department of Defense, but according to this historical news article of the voyage of the USS Eleanor back in 1919, where it proceeded to dump mustard gas and other munitions on its voyage from Chesapeake Bay up to New York Harbor, there may indeed be munitions on the sea bottom that in areas that we are unaware of, and despite our survey activity, we have not found. Here is an excerpt from the research activities plans from Dominion Energy as it was preparing to build its two-tower demonstration project, where they addressed the issue as well. They did their survey activity, but their position was that because they had done their surveys, there should be no impacts during operation of the project. So it is a very low probability issue for certain. I think we all acknowledge that. Our surveys are quite thorough. We certainly don't expect to find munitions where we have surveyed, but although it's very low probability, it is potentially very high consequence, because we would have construction equipment and vessels on scene, and if we come across munitions on the sea bottom during construction operations and are required to stop operations, could become very costly and could have a ripple effect, or a daisy chain effect, that the schedules and other issues are affected by the finding of this unexploded ordnance. So as I alluded to earlier here, this is a sample scenario. So we have a pre-construction survey, it's been completed, found no munitions. The construction vessels are on site and they're actively working. So we have cabling vessels on site, we have wind turbine installation vessels on site, we have support vessels on site. You see what I'm saying? We're constructing a wind farm. One of these vessels discovers a previously unidentified object, and we confirm that it is it's a munitions. What is the guidance to be followed is the question, okay? So we would propose that developers gather the appropriate information to examine options that we may have and to make sound recommendations, and provide that information to the appropriate authorities, which remain to be identified, but we've been working with Bessie and we think it's Bessie. I think Bessie thinks it's Bessie. So it would appear to me Bessie would be the decision-making authority, perhaps with its other federal and state partners, and a timely government decision. That's what we would be looking for, is guidance that tells us the information that the federal government would need, and hopefully a commitment to make a decision in a timely manner that allows us to balance all of the risks, but avoid extraordinary delays. So here is this is called the UXO risk management framework, and you can see that it's from a private enterprise called ORDTech, but it's an 8-phase process. And so when we are constructing a wind farm, we have gone through the first 7 steps in this process, okay? So we have searched for unexploded ordnance, or MEC, munitions of explosive concern. If we have found any, we have addressed that concern through avoidance or mitigation, and we have reduced any risk to as low as reasonably practical, and we are prepared to begin construction. So the scenario that I'm talking about and the issue that I'm talking about all revolves around residual UXO. This is not an emergency scenario where someone or vessel brings up unexploded ordnance onto a vessel by mistake, and that needs to be addressed urgently. And I think perhaps that's what Commander West was speaking about, what they can do within 12 miles and beyond 12 miles. That's not the situation that we're talking about here, because that situation, I think, is well addressed through history and past practice on what to do. Not worried about that. We're worried about this residual UXO, where we unexpectedly find munitions on the sea bottom, in the path of our construction or on the site of our construction, and we need to recommend a course of action to the federal government, and we need a timely decision on moving forward. Okay. So with that phase 8 action, it would be the developer or the principal contractor taking action. We would again examine the steps that we took through phases 1 through 7. We would prepare, and our proposal for guidance would be preparing plain language application to BOEM or BESI, describing the actions taken during that 8-step process that I just showed, and have a recommendation on what to do going forward. That would be step 8. So we would address the alternatives. Obviously, avoidance would be our first alternative, and we would discuss why that was our preferred alternative or why it was not, why we couldn't do it. DOD, we would look to DOD for assistance, and then we would discuss why DOD could or could not assist. We would go through the list. Is commercial lift and shift, is that an option? Is detonation of some sort an option? We would provide justification in a plan for our preferred alternative to the appropriate authorities, either BOEM or BESI. That's our proposal. So some of the questions that we would have is, what is the status of BOEM's or BESI position relative to vineyard wind? Has this issue been addressed in any manner with the vineyard wind project, which is first in the queue and ahead of Ørsted, of course, in the construction and the permitting process? Would the BOEM and BESI review, or the review in general, would it be concurrent or sequential? So could we expect the federal government to review this all at the same time, or would we have to go through a agency by agency process to get sign-offs, if you will, before a final decision is made? And we would ask which agency makes the final decision on what we can do if we encounter this residual UXO or MEC. Would that be BOEM or BESI or another agency? And the time to make the decision, which is critical, we would be looking for a timely decision, as I mentioned earlier. We think a timely decision would be 24 hours or thereabouts. That would be a target for sure, but time to make a decision would be critical. We think this listening session is very helpful. We've had conversations certainly on this issue with BESI and BOEM previous. I think a reasonable next step, and a very perhaps a very productive next step, would be a tabletop exercise with the appropriate federal agencies. Tabletop, or what they call a rehearsal of concept exercise, with all of the developers who choose to participate, and of course, again, the appropriate federal agencies. So back to the 3 questions asked by the US CMTS in its advertisement for the listening session. What are the current related challenges? It is the residual MEC, as I discussed in today's presentation. The lessons learned, as I said, it's a very low probability but very high consequence scenario in terms of operational delay, and then the daisy chain effect this could have, absent sound federal guidance to facilitate a timely decision, which we would consider 24 hours. And what can the task team take to facilitate the efforts to fill these identified gaps? And again, it would be to develop guidance jointly with the industry. And we can do that through, I think the next step again would be a tabletop exercise or rehearsal of concept exercise where we could get some draft guidance produced from that. Thank you very much again for the opportunity. Ørsted intends to submit written comments before the 16 December deadline.
Thank you, sir. Sincerely appreciate you joining us today. Let me reiterate what Mr. LeBlanc said. If you would like to submit written comments to the CMTS, our Offshore Energy Facilitation Task Team, please do so at offshoreenergy@cmts.gov. We have one other presenter who asked to present today. Let me mention again that if you did not ask to present, you still can do so today. We ask that if you are in the Teams application that you raise your hand. If you look at the top of your panel, top of your screen, you'll see a smiley face with a hand in front of it. If you go scroll over that, right below, you'll see a raised hand. Just click that. You'll see that I'm going to do that, and my hand is raised. I will call on you. When you are completed, you just lower your hand by clicking on that raised hand again. Afterwards, we will ask if there's anybody on the phone and not on the computer who would also like to make a statement. We do ask that you identify yourself and your organization. Thank you. Our next presenter is Lieutenant Adrian Dan from James Fisher Renewables. Are you with us today, Adrian?
Yeah, hi Helen. Hi
Hello.
everybody. Hi. It's my mistake, or our mistake actually. I should have Paula with me as well. Paula's going to do the magic bit on sharing the screen, which she's just done mercifully. Thanks,
Yes, sir,
Paula.
we can see it.
Yeah. I don't really like the handle, the military handle. I was actually a lieutenant commander when I left the Navy, but that doesn't matter. It was a long time ago in 2002 when I left the Royal Navy, having spent 26 years in there. Joined as a boy, and left as a special duties lieutenant commander in 2002, having spent all of my time in maritime mine warfare, explosive ordnance disposal. Ran the Faslane bomber mine disposal team, which looks after the nuclear deterrent in Scotland. And my last job in the Navy was the requirements manager for new EOD and diving equipment. This afternoon, I'm just going to give you a short presentation on the capability, and hopefully we'll be able to answer some of the boss's questions which were just raised. And if nothing else, I think there'll be food for thought, which will hopefully generate some discussion and no doubt some debate. Before I start, perhaps I should just say that the exam paper, which previous presenter showed us, the ORDTech matrix, is a matrix which is, I'm going to use the words very familiar, but please don't think that I'm being complacent. It's a matrix which is very familiar to us because we have worked with ORDTech on many of the offshore wind farms, both of the UK coast, North Sea, Scottish area, Irish Sea, but also in Europe. And that matrix is very familiar with us, and we're very used to interacting with it and working with ORDTech to identify the threat and working together for the client in delivering the end result, which of course is a safe job, a LARP certificate, etc., so that the construction phase can crack on. Next slide, please. Our purpose at James Fisher, I'm the EOD superintendent, but I suppose I should get used to the other acronym, although won't fall quite as easily off the tongue as UXO or EOD. EOD, of course, it's an acronym-rich environment that we live in. So if I come up with an acronym, please just ask us afterwards. If I'll try and explain each one, but if not, ask us afterwards. EOD is the explosive ordnance disposal, and we specialise in this area and have done. Personally, I set up my company in 2002 when I left the Navy. We've been doing offshore bomber mine disposal ever since. Sorry, yeah, can you go back to the next one, please? Yeah. As previously been mentioned, the scenario that is being sort of presented here is that of either nuisance or the sort of a chance find, as we would call it, where the construction phase has started. There are a lot of assets in the field, and all of a sudden we come across a CM or a UXO, or you do, and of course that could cause a problem, and as it's previously been stated, could be a very expensive problem potentially if it's not dealt with. We're going to cover all of the or some of the options anyway. It's up to you to decide which ones you may want to look at. But basically, if the object is probably going to be proud if it's been found anyway. It's more than likely proud because it's been discovered. But just also bear in mind that sometimes things don't present themselves like the moored mine, top left there, and are quite often found during trenching phases or other intervention activities on the seafloor, where there'll be an ROV or some inspection vehicle on the seafloor which will discover this item. We'll go through the various methods which we could recommend that we would use to take care of that for you as safely and as expediently and of course cost effectively as possible. We're used to seeing things in nice visibility, but of course that's not always the way the world is, and sometimes the world isn't quite, completely spherical. It's not a problem. There are various electronic aids which we can use subsea. Again, all of which our team, be them the ROV team, surveyors, and the EOD team, are all familiar and very experienced and adept at using. If you haven't seen what we call an acoustic lens, the weapon of choice, really, or the system of choice, sorry, is a thing called an ARIS, AIRS, 3 megahertz sonar, and it makes the water transparent no matter what color the water is. So there's a little example there of a Soviet M82 mine in good visibility, but if the visibility wasn't there, we're also looking at the acoustic lens on the right hand side, which is giving us a very good three-dimensional view of that item, which we can also measure. So we pride ourselves in identifying whatever the item is by its country of origin, its type, its net explosive quantity. If it's a chemical munition or something particularly sort of on the nasty end of right-hand side of conventional, then we can also assist with that. Next slide, please, Paul. As has previously been mentioned, we didn't write this together, but these are the sort of the recommended actions that we would suggest. Obviously, avoid, reroute the cable, or find an alternative geodetic position for the WTG, the wind turbine generator, offshore substation, or offshore nearshore asset. Cables and inter-array cables can usually be quite easily sort of swerved, for want of a better word. But in line with symmetry, no pun intended, the moving a geodetic position of a seafloor asset might not be quite so easy. Another option, and these aren't in necessarily the order, the priority. Another option is to relocate, either to a designated wet storage area or to an alternative disposal position. And we have a system called a remote ordnance lifting system, ROLS. Can work in conjunction. It works in conjunction with the ROV on the spread, and basically we attach a grab, which you'll see a picture of in a moment, to the remotely to whatever the item is, and we then lift and shift it quite literally using a remote controlled rib, which has a 3-ton super winch which can lift the item clear of the seafloor. We then tow it with another rib 200 meters behind us, because we're not that brave, and then set it down in the new position, which can either be a designated wet storage area, where if it's permissible to leave it in that wet storage area, then that's fine, or to arrange the subsequent disposal of it or them, because it could be a cluster of munitions. And in the case of the ones which are shown before, what we've done recently this year is there were clusters of munitions in a wind farm that we did off Germany, and we put them in what we call a stillage, which is a metal basket, really a metal crate, and then we lift multiple items. Each part of the stillage has its own little compartment, which is bespoke made by the fabricators to make sure that there's enough room in each compartment for each item that we're going to have to move, such that it remains separate from each other and doesn't rattle about when we're moving it to the next stage. Or we can dispose in situ. We've got well, we can do all three methods, and I don't mean that to sound arrogant: high order, low order, and low yield. And I don't know if everybody's familiar with the low yield. You might not be, because it's actually quite new. I actually developed it in 2015, and it's becoming a sort of a very desirable solution, shall we say, because I'll explain more about it in a minute. But it's certainly more environmentally friendly than a high order disposal in situ, and it has certain advantages over the low order technique as well, which I'll also go on to explain. Next slide, please. And the Barracuda, I called it Barracuda because a Barracuda, as we probably all know, is an apex predator, and it's nice to have an apex predator in this environment, because it's usually going to win. It's basically a 4-inch, 104 millimeter in metric modular self-fill shape charge, which will contain between 1.5 and 5 kilos of plastic explosive. also known as primary energetic, if you're not familiar with the term, depending on the techniques selected by the EOD supervisor on the scene. Now, what's interesting here is that if we were to end up in this scenario, there would also be, if we were lucky enough to win, there would also be one of the AUTEC operators on board the vessel with us. And between the team, the guys will hold a very similar, if not identical, qualification professionally. So we work together to identify the best solution and to cause the least environmental impact as far as we can. It's designed to induce a deliberate high order against the designated target, and this system has disposed of over 1,200 items of live UXO or MEC since 2009, which was the first job was the Nord Stream gas pipeline in 2009, and we've been actively involved in every single wind farm since. Most recently this year we've done 3, and we've used another system on that, which I'll tell you a little bit more about in a minute. I put the picture of the moored mine in there. That's what the US Navy would call a US Type 10. We call it a Mark 16. Sorry, the Mark 16. We call it a Mark 28 in the UK. It's about 1 meter in diameter. It's 10 millimeters thick of mild steel, and that's a new one. That's a brand new one with no explosive in it. It will just have concrete, and that's basically what the Barracuda will do. So it'll punch a hole in an inert object. So you can imagine what it does to a live item. We would recommend, certainly in the current environment, which we stress as far as we can and try as hard as we can to implement all of the environmental mitigations such that we cause the minimum damage to fauna, flora, fish and mammals. And we would recommend the use of a bubble curtain with this. Barracuda is fitted onto a work class ROV, which again, we've operated from over 36 different types of vessels, usually DP2, dynamic positioning 2, some DP3, and basically the work class ROV will take the disruptor, shall we say, down to the seafloor and place it in the critical position, right in the bullseye, at the most vulnerable part of the item. And again, that's discussed, would be discussed between ourselves and AUTEC on board. And if we've got prior information on the target, we will be able to give you the disposal solution. If we haven't, if it's a chance find, then we will very quickly provide that to you so that there are no surprises. Once the weapon is in place, then releases what we call a shot line float, which is a twin shot line using non-electric shock tube, which is completely immune to any electrical stray influences, which is very important on a commercial vessel. The ROV then gets recovered back on board. The vessel lays off approximately 1,200 meters. The shot lines are connected to this magic black box. And then once all of the environmental mitigations have been put in place, and this could involve acoustic deterrent devices, passive acoustic monitoring systems, fish scare and charges, usually take place an hour to an hour and a half prior to the main shot being taken. We then take the shot on the primary shot.
Mr. Dan, could you begin to summarize, please?
Yes. Next slide, please. Hydra, very quickly, is the low yield technique. It looks quite similar to the Barracuda, but inside it's very different. It basically produces a very high pressure water jet, which will disintegrate and the main filling of an explosive and disrupt the actuation and arming parts. Basically what you end up with, next slide please, basically you end up with, and again please, is there's a sequence of events of what was a live mine, started as a live mine, placement of the weapon, the low yield disruption which cracks Humpty Dumpty open like an egg and just leaves a little blemish on the seafloor. That little blemish is about 1 meter wide and about 1/2 meter deep. If that had high ordered, it would be about 5 times that size. Next slide, please. Environmental impact, we mentioned various items which we activate either passively or actively in the area prior to taking the main shot. Next slide, please. And in summary, we've been doing this for 12 years. operated from 36 vessels, 1,200 plus disposals, and we've never had an incident or an accident, of which we're very proud. Sorry, Helen, if that overran a little bit.
It's all good. Thank you so much, Mr. Dan. I really appreciate it. Quick question to you, though. You mentioned DoD supervisor. Did you mean as in Department of Defense supervisor?
So, I beg your pardon, Helen. No, it should have been EOD, Echo Oscar
EOD.
Yes, sorry.
Roger that. That's okay. Thank you so much. Make that clear. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I do not see any hands raised. So I'm going to go to folks on the phone. Is there anybody on the phone that would like to present? You're going to have to just jump in and verbally let us know. Anybody on the phone that would like to present, please just jump in and let us know. Is there anybody that is on the application team's application that does not have their hand raised but would like to say something? Sir, I see a gentleman. Oh, he got off the video. Is there anybody on the computer on Teams that would like to jump in the absence of raising your hand and say a few words? Thank you. We have Mr. Todd Wardwell from U.S. Coast Guard. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I apologize in advance. I'm having to do this conference call from a Dunkin' Donuts along the road, so if it's background noise, I apologize in advance.
It's okay, roger that.
My concern is I've actually been on some unexploded ordnance cases off the New Jersey coast. We pulled 2 of them, one in 2016, one in 2017, I believe. Might have the years wrong. I know that some of you guys are talking about the offshore wind project that's already been validated and is ready to go. Some of the concerns that we obviously have in the Jersey area, we're definitely more concerned with WMD type unexploded ordnance than we are the actual shell type. Most of our experience is that the explosive type kind of like slowly tapered off in the 1970s and early 80s, where we had fishing boats blowing the sterns off with recovered torpedoes and things like that. We don't see as much of the explosives anymore, but we do see a lot of mustard gas. With that, the stuff that we've learned from experience with pulling those shells or responding to fishing vessels that got exposed to mustard gas was that the FBI took a keen interest in where these shells were. And honestly, if you guys never pulled those shells off, if you just kind of pushed them off to the side and marked them and we kept them in a secret spreadsheet somewhere, I'd be more than happy with that, but that's not my call to make. But as far as leaving the shells kind of in situ or putting them in an area and marking them, I think there also has to be some involvement with some of the folks. The FBI guys that responded with our case were very concerned about people like terrorists taking these things off the seafloor and using them as WMDs. So they wanted a lot of accountability with that. So that's as a shout out to those guys, it's somebody you're probably going to want to have involved at some point, if nothing more than on a notification basis. And the other thing about when you get to the Jersey Shore and do that, these shells are incredibly, it's wonderful. And I'm grateful for the last presenter, Lieutenant Commander. Some of the pictures you see, those shells don't really look like shells. They look like large dog excrement, for better lack of a word. We've definitely done a pretty good job getting the word out to fishermen and bottom draggers and clammers and those folks, but they still pull them up fairly frequently, and they kind of just toss them over the side. So, the risk is certainly there. But the last unexploded ordnance shell we pulled up actually came up in a crate with straw in it. So the issue that we're having now might be a reintegration of shells into the environment, because we have several down transports. So the area off of New Jersey was, the Germans sometimes called it the happy hunting ground, where they torpedoed several dozen vessels in the area, and several of those vessels actually had munitions on board. And it's our fear that some of those crates that were in the holds of those vessels have now, because of the vessels have decayed, the holds have broken open, and some of these crates are now kind of free flowing along the bottom. So we've done our best to kind of, keep our eyes and ears open as to what the fishing fleet's doing. But these are valid concerns. I know that the flavor of the munitions is definitely going to be different up in Massachusetts versus New Jersey and Maryland, but we definitely the general consensus in our area has been to leave the shells in place, mark where they found them, and kind of like migrate them to an area where nobody's going to be like fishing over them, bottom dragging, clamming, or something like that. So I hate to rain on anybody's parade, but sometimes the doing nothing is definitely the best solution. So I'm definitely open to comments for that. I don't necessarily speak for the Coast Guard as a whole, but from a first responder standpoint, bringing these things ashore is a nightmare of dealing with a whole bunch of different entities that have their say in it. So, the piling them up and marking them and putting the warning signs out is always an option as well. And I wish you guys luck on this project because I think that's a pretty valid use of offshore. Thanks. That's all.
Thank you so much, sir. Could you just reiterate your full name and title, please?
Sure. I'm sorry. You specifically called that out. So
I did, yes. If you could help us out, though. And
my name is
provide your-
Todd Wardwell. I'm with U.S. Coast Guard Sector Delaware Bay, which in military speak is Philadelphia, and my role there is port recovery specialist. So I'm the person that has to prepare the port for potential disasters, hurricanes, storms, and stuff like that. I'm also in charge of MTSRU, so Marine Transportation System Recovery Unit, which you guys kind of have in your title as well. So all this plays into that. I don't have as big a role in wind right now, but they want to be on the call because I'm the most experienced offshore ordnance guy they have at the unit right now.
Roger that. Thank you, and thank you for your service. We appreciate that. We still have no hands raised in the application. Is there anybody, though, that is on Teams, on the computer, or on the phone that would like to present? We have another hand raised.
Hi, this is Eniel Sandberg, work with Dominion Energy. My title is Safety Compliance Program Manager for Offshore Wind.
Thank you, sir. Go ahead.
The thing I wanted to raise, and maybe it's more of a question than talking about it, is the safety of the explosives that you'd be using to detonate the UXOs. I have a second-hand story from our client representative who had been working in the UK, where one of these inadvertently went off on the deck of a vessel. That is the C4 that you use to destroy the UXO. No one was hurt, but it obviously raised that. And I saw that in the presentation from Adrian. They haven't had any experience of inadvertent explosion, but it would be interesting to know a little bit more about the safety around that.
Thank you, sir. This is a listening session, so I'm sorry that Mr. Dan cannot respond, but we do acknowledge your question and we'll make note of it. Thank you. Are there any other comments that people would like to make, either on the phone or on the computer? Please just do so. Introduce yourself and your organization. There are currently no hands raised, but we will take oral comments if you would like to jump in on the phone or on the computer, please. In the absence of comments or questions, I want to ask Mr. LeBlanc or Mr. Dan if you have additional comments you would like to make. Yes. Mr. Dan?
Yeah,
So you have your hand
thank you,
raised?
Helen. Just while we've got a couple of minutes, perhaps obviously there'll be a formal answer to the not the questions per se, but some of the points that were raised by Todd and the previous presenter. Just for your sort of ease of mind, Todd. Certainly, if we were lucky enough to get the job with Ortec, we wouldn't be bringing anything along those lines or inviting you to receive anything along those lines into your harbour or anywhere near it. And it is a problem with, as you mentioned, with the sensitivities and of these items if they were to fall into the wrong hands. We call it rather politely people who are useful to the ill-disposed. in ex-military speak. But there are, as I'm sure you're aware, Todd, various ways and means of dealing with either singular or multiple occurrences of that type of item, which we'd be delighted to share with the team in terms of the recommendation, not only removing it safely from the area, but also then preventing anybody else from being able to ever interact with it again. And there's a technique that we have, which basically that stillage that I mentioned. We basically agree with whoever the authorities where it's going to be put into wet storage, but it goes a stage further than that. We actually fill it with a couple of tons of slag cement as well. So we incarcerate it in a concrete coffin, which will prevent anybody from interacting it and interacting with anything else ever again. So I hope that sort of sets your mind at rest. Just to make a brief comment on the previous observations. I mentioned I didn't have time really to go into the specifics of our disruptor systems, disposal systems, but we use the non-electric system really because of the safety, intrinsic safety that it affords. Primary energetics are stowed in when they're not being used, are stowed in separate magazines, bespoke magazines. These are proper explosive storage, licensed explosive storages, and they would be mobilised from the UK to wherever they would need to be. One holds the 1.1, which is the blasting explosive, the C4 or Semtex 1 Alpha as we use, and the other one holds the non-electric stores. So they're in segregated compartments. There's a 2-key routine. The master holds one key and the EOD supervisor holds the other. So it's a little bit like the captain and the first lieutenant on a nuclear submarine. To release any of the toys, it needs the compliance of both parties to actually make that happen. But I'd just like to mention again, we don't mean to sound arrogant or in any way complacent, but we've done over 1,200 of these live serials, and as I said, we've not had an accident or incident of which we're very proud. And Alltech have acted with us in some of those scenarios as well. Thanks, Anne.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Again, we still have time for other comments. Would anybody like to raise their hand or jump in to make a comment, please? Mr. Dan, you still have your hand raised. I'm assuming you would like to take that down. Thank you.
Sorry, Anne.
It's all good, sir. Anybody else that would like to present? Just to remind that written comments may be provided to the CMTS Offshore Energy Facilitation Task Team via the email offshoreenergy@cmts.gov. Additional information on this listening session and that email is available at www.cmts.gov. This listening session is being recorded. We anticipate that if technology will support, and we have had challenges, we hope to make it available on the website at cmts.gov. Are there any other comments, please? Going once. Going twice. All right, thank you. I want to thank the BSEE for recommending to the CMTS that an interagency committee task team on offshore energy facilitation be established. It was approved by our coordinating board, and we're grateful to co-leads of BSEE and the U.S. Coast Guard, as well as the number of other federal agencies that are part of this task team. This listening session, in addition to being recorded, notes were officially taken by a third party. We're going to monitor that. All information will be summarized and provided to the task team. We would like to wait until we receive all comments, and the deadline for written comments is December 16th. Please direct all questions or comments to offshoreenergy@cmts.gov. One last call for any other comments or questions. All right, with that, any last words from our friend at BSEE or U.S. Coast Guard? Jonathan, Steve?
Thank you, Bill. Nothing for me, just wanted to say thank you to all the participants who called in today. It looks like at one point we had over 90 people call in, so really appreciate the attention to this concern.
Wonderful, thank you. Commander, to you.
Thanks everyone for their input. This is really good food for thought, and look forward to working with you all as we move forward with some guidance for the field. Thanks.
Thank you. I note that, Mr. Dan, we have your slides, but Mr. LeBlanc, if we do not have a copy of the slides, we welcome receiving those as well. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate your time and attention. Have a good day.